Welcome back to TSO Daily Dose. I'm very excited to be sitting down this morning with conservationist and environmental activist Geoff Law. Geoff, thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no worries, Mitch. Thanks for having me.
You're an avid TSO concert goer, an environmental activist. Sometimes classical music, in my friend's mind, seems a mile or miles and miles away from activism. So how did you get into classical music, and was it through your environmental work, or was there a deeper, longer history there?
Oh, well, actually, my first proper experience of classical music, when I started to really like it, was on an international flight. The first one I'd ever done, I was with my family flying to Europe. You know, here was this headset, and I put it in my ears and turned it on, and it was on the classical music station, and suddenly here's this orchestral sound all around me, and I sort of shuffled in my chair thinking everyone else must be suddenly hearing this too. You know, and of course they weren't. And then I settled down and listened to this orchestral version of Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. I just found it so sort of satisfying and interesting and rewarding that after the trip I decided that that was the sort of music that I was going to focus on, and started acquiring audio cassettes.
Okay, cassettes. I was going to suggest maybe discs, proper LPs, no?
No, I didn't have those sort of resources, you know. I just had to listen to this in my room with a small device, you know, a cassette player. You know, started acquiring Beethoven symphonies and Mozart piano concertos and Brahms symphonies, and sort of followed what's probably a pretty usual, conventional sort of trajectory into classical music. But because I didn't have much money, I would be listening to the one cassette over and over and over again, and getting immersed in a particular piece. So that even if sometimes I bought something I didn't like very much at first hearing, so a friend told me about Mahler, and I thought, okay, Mahler. And I bought his Symphony No. 4. Yeah. And started listening to that and thought, oh. And then in the fourth movement, there's the soprano, and I thought, oh, you know, I like this orchestral stuff, but soprano, I don't know about that. Yeah. But because I'd spent $8, I thought, well, you have to listen to this.
You have to give it another go.
I have to get my money's worth out of it. So I listened to it again and again, and after a while I thought, well, actually, this is quite beautiful. This song at the end is lovely, and it was sort of like a barrier had been broken, because suddenly I could listen to sopranos, and it wasn't just this sort of kind of send-up, archetypal, Three Stooges, opera send-up.
Yeah, that's right.
It was something of extraordinary beauty, and you sort of don't go back from that, and it opens up whole new vistas of experience and music and beauty, and that's more or less, you know,
that's the trajectory.
Yeah, and it's not all that different from getting to know a natural environment.
So do you find there's a correlation there with sort of slowing down and finding this calmness with both classical music and being in the wilderness?
Yeah, definitely. You know, they're both very immersive experiences, and you sort of need to overcome a sense of impatience. You can't afford to be expecting too much immediately. Neither is going to give instantaneous gratification. Mm-hmm. If you walk into a natural environment, then, you know, it does take a bit of time to start noticing all of the detail, whether it's lichen on a rock or some mosses, or a particular shaft of light on a distant mountain. And it's a similar sort of thing with classical music. You know, they are longer pieces. Yeah. I can't listen to them in a sort of revolving door sort of sense, with one piece after another, you know, it washes over the top of you. Yeah. And I think that's probably why a lot of people find classical music a little bit bamboozling, because they haven't put the time into it. But if you do put the time into it, it's just amazingly rewarding. And I usually find, you know, with long, complex pieces, that by the time I've listened to it 4 or 5 times, I'm on a very steep curve, and you're hearing all sorts of wonders in the music, which, you know, I was oblivious to at first hearing. It's just a nice experience, and it's fulfilling and enriching to be able to immerse yourself in these works of art that then give you all sorts of insights and articulate certain emotions without using words that one experiences in one's normal course of life, but that they are somehow intensified by these pieces of music.
You chose Mozart 41 initially as the piece that would follow this interview, but we just performed this and we've put it out on Daily Dose already. But what is it about Mozart 41 that excites you? Well,
when I first heard the fourth movement of it, and I'd read about the Jupiter Symphony, and it was sort of built up a bit. And I heard it for the first time and thought, well, this almost seems a bit dry and academic. And then, you do the same thing, listen to it 2 or 3 or 4 times and realise, wow, this is just transporting.
Yeah.
What does it do? It's this perfect sort of combination of intellectual sort of discipline and rigour combined with this sort of creative freedom, and the two get married perfectly.
Yeah.
And when the TSO did a performance a few years ago, I just found myself, completely transported by it.
It sounds like for you, TSO is a great doorway to exploring new and different things, and it's so nice that we can be down here on this little island at the end of the world in this beautiful, pristine little place, and have. I'm lucky enough to be part of an orchestra that can do this service for people that live in this town and open doors to different worlds of music. So I'm so glad that we can do that. But let's talk about this beautiful, pristine little place, at the end of the world that happens to have a great orchestra. What brought you to Tasmania?
I went camping lots with my family, did sort of day walks with my dad. Gradually developed this affinity for the natural world. First of all, it's purely aesthetic, just walking through a forest and then onto a ridge top and then down into a canyon, and there are rock formations. And, I like the sense of a journey. And mountainous landscapes were particularly alluring for me. And so I was living in Victoria at the time, and Tasmania was this enchanted island to the south. And after I'd finished my sort of HSC exams, I was on a plane to Tasmania and walking the overland track.
Wow.
And from there, the walks into Tasmania's wilderness got longer, more adventurous. I started doing extended solo journeys, and eventually discovered this campaign about a river called the Franklin. And that was so compelling. I mean, that was the drama of the day. And particularly for young people, and young people like me who loved the wilderness, loved bushwalking, just were appalled at the desecration of the natural world that was happening along the fringes and at places such as Lake Pedder. It was impossible not to become engaged with that campaign, even though I'd written myself off as the sort of person who could raft a wild river and respond accordingly in rapids. I thought, I will capsize and die if I do that.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, I found myself rafting the Franklin and had quite an experience. I mean, parts of it were terrifying and other parts were just extraordinarily beautiful. But it drew me in, as it drew in so many friends of mine and colleagues and hundreds and thousands of people around Australia into this effort, this endeavour, which, in some ways was sort of like the first movement of Beethoven's Symphony No. 3. It was this heroic effort which had all these different elements to it that evolved, and the campaign sort of breathed and developed a momentum. But then, we suffered horrible setbacks, and we could have been forgiven for experiencing despair or pessimism. And some people did give up and then came back in later on. But that that campaign, which was ultimately successful, produced environmental activists of a whole generation of people who then went on to trying to protect forests in different parts of Australia, trying to develop wilderness legislation, trying to protect and extend the Kakadu World Heritage Area, trying to protect the forests here, tackling things like wood chip mills, proposed new pulp mills, etc. But it was that initial
That was the spark.
impetus of the natural environment combined with the Franklin River campaign, combined with Bob Brown's leadership, that generated this movement and everything that has subsequently sprung from that.
That was the thing that brought you here, and you've stayed here, and you're still, you're still an activist. You work with the Bob Brown Foundation. I looked up the other night. You're on the Adani Watch. Is that right? That's your role in the foundation at the moment.
Yes, I'm coordinating the Adani Watch project, which is looking at the record of the Adani Group internationally, in particular on environmental issues.
We were talking before off camera, when you started, you were a big, scary, greeny activist with a big beard, but now your role has changed somewhat, but your ethic is still there. You're still driving in the same direction of protecting the beauty that, we see around us in this country and around the world,
I've done some work in Indonesia as well, and work for some international environment groups, particularly on World Heritage properties. So people might know that the Tasmanian wilderness is inscribed as a World Heritage Area.
Yes.
There are now over 1,000 World Heritage Areas around the world. The natural sites include places such as the Grand Canyon, Mount Everest, the Serengeti Plains in Africa, but also a lot of places that are under threat, whether it's tropical rainforests in Indonesia or parts of the Caucasus Mountains in Russia and so on.
Wow.
And so it's been great to work with an international network that's doing its best to protect a lot of those places and which is reporting on the problems associated with them and attending the international conferences associated with World Heritage, or at least up until this year, and working with a network of people at those conferences who are trying to influence the way the political decisions are being made in that sort of international environment. And you can imagine, that's not all that easy, given international politics at the moment, which tends to be fragmenting.
Yes.
That there's a lot of nationalism, and there's a sort of rule of increasingly dictatorial regimes and oligarchs and so on that's making the job of conservation quite difficult in those international forums, because the commitment to international cooperation that was taken for granted this time, say 20, 25 years ago, has been fragmenting.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on today, Geoff.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks, Mitch.
It's been an honour to have you in here. We're going to round out this interview on Daily Dose with another wonderful clip of music. I hope you enjoy.